The year was 1865, and Dry Creek was a place where the sun burned hotter than judgment and mercy came slower than rain. Dust hung in the air like a curse, settling over the wooden storefronts and the faces of the townsfolk who gathered in the square that afternoon. By noon, the dust had swallowed the sky, and the cries of a woman cut through it like a blade. Eleanor Hayes stood barefoot in the dirt, one hand cradling her swollen belly, the other shielding her eyes from the sun. The crowd around her murmured in a low, restless hum. Farmers, wives, drifters, all drawn by the scent of scandal. Her hair, the color of wheat before harvest, clung to her face with sweat. She didn't weep. Not yet. She stood silent, her lips cracked, eyes fixed on the sheriff who towered before her like a shadow carved from the heat. Sheriff Rogan Pierce was a man who had long ago mistaken cruelty for law. His hat brim cast a dark line across his face, cutting his features in half, light on one side, emptiness on the other. The town respected him because they feared him. He spat into the dirt, the sound sharp and final. "You stole a horse, Mrs. Hayes," he said. "You know what that means." Behind her, tied to a hitching post, the brown mare snorted and pawed the ground. Eleanor shook her head weakly. "I didn't steal her. She was my husband's. I only—" Her voice faltered, breaking like thin ice. "You only ran," Rogan said, stepping closer. "You ran from this town, from your debt, from justice. The horse belonged to my brother. He found her grazing by your shack. That's theft." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Near the edge of the gathering, a broad-shouldered man leaned against a hitching rail, hat low, eyes narrowed. Caleb Ward, once a soldier, now a wanderer with dust in his boots and ghosts in his sleep. He watched the scene unfold with that particular stillness soldiers learn after too many battles. When movement feels like betrayal. Caleb had come to Dry Creek looking for work, maybe a bed that didn't smell of sweat and whiskey. But now, watching the sheriff circle the woman, something in him stirred, a pull he didn't want and couldn't ignore. Eleanor's brother, a young man barely more than a boy, stepped between her and Rogan. His voice cracked with courage he didn't have. "She didn't take that horse. You know she didn't." Rogan smiled, thin, cold. "Then you can speak for her, son. But remember what that costs." Caleb saw it coming before it happened. The flicker of a deputy's hand, the nervous shift of a rifle. The sound split the air like thunder. One shot. Eleanor's brother fell, without a word, dust blooming red beneath him. For a heartbeat, the world stopped breathing. Then came the screams. Eleanor dropped to her knees beside her brother's body, clutching his shirt, the front of it soaked in blood. "No, no." Her voice broke into a raw sound that didn't belong to words. Rogan turned, eyes cold, hand still on his gun. He drew first. He lied, though everyone knew he hadn't. "This ends here." Caleb stepped forward. His boots thudded against the earth, slow and heavy. "That boy didn't draw on you, Sheriff." The crowd parted slightly, wary of a stranger's tone. Rogan squinted. "And who the hell are you to say so?" "Someone who's seen enough killing to know when it's murder," Caleb said. Rogan's hand drifted toward his holster again, lazy, deliberate. "You picking a fight with the law, mister?" Caleb shook his head. "No, sir. Just telling you to walk away, before you make another widow." The sheriff laughed once, short and sharp. "You got a big mouth for a drifter, and you got a badge you don't deserve." A hush fell. The air thickened, heat pressing down like a hand. Then Rogan nodded to his men. "Take him." Caleb moved first. His revolver cleared leather with the ease of habit. He didn't fire, just leveled it, steady as a cross. "You'll want to think twice," he said quietly. "Ain't no justice in spilling more blood today." The deputy hesitated, eyes darting between them. Dust swirled at their feet. Eleanor lifted her head, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She looked at Caleb as though seeing him for the first time, like a man pulled from a storm. Then, somewhere behind them, a horse shrieked. The brown mare broke free, jerking the post loose. Chaos erupted. Men shouted, the crowd scattered, and in the confusion, Caleb grabbed Eleanor's arm. "Come on," he barked. "I can't." "You can if you want to live." He pulled her through the side alley, boots pounding the dirt. Gunshots cracked behind them, bullets whining past. They reached the edge of town, where the open plain stretched wide and merciless. He threw her onto the back of a stray horse, swung up behind her and kicked hard. The animal bolted, hooves hammering against the hardpan. Behind them, the town blurred into smoke and dust. Rogan shouted something they couldn't hear. Another shot rang out, missing wide. Caleb didn't look back. They rode until the sun sank low, the sky bleeding orange over the desert. When they finally stopped, it was by a dry creek bed, the same one that gave the town its name. Eleanor slid off the horse and collapsed onto her knees. Gasping, Caleb dismounted, chest heaving, every muscle trembling with the effort of escape. She spoke between sobs. "My brother, he's gone." Caleb looked away. The words lodged like gravel in his throat. "I know." He was all I had left. He knelt beside her, unsure whether to offer comfort or distance. "You can't go back," he said quietly. "Rogan won't let you breathe. You're safer heading east, maybe the river." She turned to him, eyes red but fierce. "Why help me? You don't even know me." Caleb stared into the dying firelight of the horizon. "Maybe because no one helped when they should have. Maybe I'm tired of watching good folks hang for bad men's pride." Eleanor's breath caught. "You're a soldier, aren't you?" He hesitated. Did you lose someone?" He didn't answer. Instead, he gathered twigs for a small fire, his hands steady but his jaw tight. "Get some rest," he murmured. "We start early." The night grew cold, stars crowding the sky. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries carried by the wind. Eleanor curled near the fire, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. Caleb sat watch, revolver across his lap, eyes fixed on the horizon where Dry Creek's faint glow still burned. He thought of the boy's body, of Rogan's smile, of all the faces he'd seen fade into the dust. He told himself he'd only done what any decent man would. But deep down, he knew decency had nothing to do with it. When the fire sank to embers, he whispered to the dark, "Guess I'm in it now." A gust of wind swept through the camp, scattering ashes into the night. Eleanor stirred but did not wake. Caleb looked toward the east, where the land stretched endless and wild. Somewhere beyond lay the river, maybe even redemption, but he knew the west didn't forgive easily. As dawn crept in, painting the desert in pale gold, he rose, tightened the saddle, and looked once more toward the horizon. Behind them, Dry Creek was still choking on its own dust. Ahead, the unknown waited. He touched the brim of his hat, voice low and certain. "We ride." And with that, the drifter and the widow disappeared into the blazing dawn, two souls bound by one man's courage and one woman's burden. The morning broke harsh and hollow, the sun bleeding over the desert like a wound that never healed. The land stretched endless and cruel, sand, stone, and silence. Caleb Ward led the mare along the narrow ridge of a dry canyon. Eleanor slumped in the saddle, her face pale, beneath the brim of a borrowed hat. The night's chill had faded, but exhaustion lingered heavy in her bones. Each step stirred the dust that clung to her skirts like sorrow refusing to let go. Caleb glanced back at her. She hadn't spoken since dawn. The silence between them was thick, filled with what couldn't be said. He could see the tremor in her hands, the way she held her stomach, like it might slip away from her if she let go. He thought about offering comfort, but words felt foreign to him now, useless things in a world that respected only silence and survival. They came upon a half-dried stream, water no deeper than a man's ankle. Caleb knelt and dipped his canteen, filling it slow to avoid stirring the silt. "Drink," he said, handing it up to her. Eleanor took it with shaking fingers. "You think they're still after us?" "They will be," he answered, scanning the horizon. "Men like Rogan don't forgive. Pride's too heavy a burden for them to carry quiet." She nodded, saying nothing more. A vulture circled high above them, its shadow gliding across the cracked earth. By midday, the heat became unbearable. The air shimmered, bending the distance into waves of false promise. Caleb found shelter under a jagged rock outcrop and motioned for her to dismount. She tried, but her legs gave way halfway down. He caught her, before she hit the ground, the sudden weight startling him. Her breath came shallow, quick. "You're pushing too hard," he said, lowering her gently. "I'm fine," she murmured, though her face told another story. He set his jaw. "You're not. You'll rest." She started to argue, but he was already building a small fire, striking flint against steel until sparks caught. The dry twigs hissed alive. He pulled a snake from his saddlebag, a rattler he'd killed earlier that morning. Its scales shimmered in the firelight as he skinned it clean with practiced hands. Eleanor wrinkled her nose. "You've done this before." "Too many times," he said, spearing the meat on his knife. "Army life teaches you what desperation tastes like." As the smell of cooking filled the air, the silence softened. Eleanor watched him, her eyes reflecting the fire's glow. "Why'd you leave the war?" she asked quietly. Caleb's movements slowed. He turned the meat once, twice. "Orders," he said finally. "Ones I couldn't stomach. We were told to clear a valley of hostiles. Men, women, children. Didn't matter. The colonel said we'd bring peace through fear." She waited, sensing there was more. "I followed orders," he said, voice low. "Watched fire roll through their homes. Heard them scream. When it was done, I walked away. Never looked back." Eleanor's voice trembled. "And you've been running since." He met her gaze. "Maybe. Or maybe I've been trying to find something worth standing for again." The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of hoofbeats. Caleb froze, head tilting. "Get down," he whispered. Eleanor obeyed without question. He doused the fire, pressing his ear to the ground. The sound was distant, but real. 3, maybe 4 riders coming fast. "Rogan's men," she whispered. "Likely." He scanned the landscape. There was nowhere to hide but a tangle of boulders near the stream bed. He led her there, crouching low, his revolver already in hand. The air grew tense, sharp with waiting. Minutes dragged like hours. The riders appeared on the ridge, a dark line against the sun. Caleb counted 4 silhouettes, rifles slung, their horses restless. He could hear their shouts now, the rough edge of pursuit. "Think they'll find us?" Eleanor asked, barely breathing. "If they do, we don't wait," Caleb said. The men dismounted, scanning the ground. One knelt, brushing dust from a hoofprint. "They went this way," the man yelled. Caleb swore, under his breath. "Time to move." They crawled along the rock face, each step deliberate. When they reached the other side, Caleb pulled a match from his vest and struck it against the stone. The flame flickered, trembling in the hot wind. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Buying us time." He tossed the match into the dry brush. Within seconds, flames spread, devouring the brittle grass. The wind took hold, fanning the fire into a roaring wall. The men's shouts turned to panic as smoke swallowed the ridge. Caleb grabbed Eleanor's hand and ran. The world blurred, heat, ash, and the pounding rhythm of hooves. They plunged into the stream, following its curve as the fire raged behind them. Smoke clawed at their lungs. Eleanor stumbled, coughing, her strength fading. Caleb caught her again, dragging her forward. "Just a little farther," he said through gritted teeth. "We'll lose them by the river." By nightfall, they reached the valley floor. The air was thick with the scent of rain. Thunder grumbled somewhere beyond the hills. Caleb scanned the horizon, dark clouds gathering, promising both salvation and peril. Eleanor sank against a fallen log, trembling. "How much farther?" "Half a day," he said. "Maybe less if the weather holds." She laughed weakly. "The weather never holds out here." Caleb smiled despite himself. "No, it doesn't." Lightning split the sky, a jagged vein of white fire. The wind howled through the canyon, bending the mesquite trees. The first drops of rain came heavy, drumming the earth. Caleb built a lean-to from broken branches, pulling Eleanor inside as the storm broke full. Water poured in sheets, soaking them through. Eleanor shivered violently, her face pale as moonlight. "Caleb," she gasped. He knelt beside her. "What is it?" "Pain," she whispered. "It's starting." He froze. "Not now." But there was no mistaking it, the way her body tensed, the sharp intake of breath. The child was coming. Caleb's heart hammered. He'd faced bullets, knives, the wrath of men. But this was something else entirely. "Hold on," he said, voice rough with panic. "You just hold on." He fed the fire higher, the flickering light painting the cave walls in gold and shadow. The rain roared outside, thunder shaking the earth. Hours blurred into moments. Eleanor's cries came and went with the storm, raw and human, echoing off stone. At last, silence. Then, faint but clear, the cry of a newborn. Caleb exhaled, shoulders shaking. He wrapped the child in his coat, placing him gently in Eleanor's arms. Her eyes glistened with exhaustion and wonder. "It's a boy," she whispered. Caleb nodded, voice breaking. "You did it." Outside, the storm began to fade. The fire crackled low, casting soft light over them. Eleanor looked at Caleb, her expression softer than it had ever been. "You saved us." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. You saved yourself. I just kept up." She smiled faintly, then drifted into sleep, the child against her chest. Caleb sat back, staring into the fire, every muscle aching, his heart strange and full. For the first time in years, he felt something like peace, fragile, fleeting, but real. He looked toward the mouth of the cave. In the distance, lightning still flashed, illuminating the wild expanse beyond. He knew Rogan wouldn't stop. The storm had only delayed him. Tomorrow would bring more dust, more danger, more reckoning. But for now, the desert was quiet. The fire burned steady. And in that stillness, Caleb found a truth he hadn't known he was searching for, that sometimes courage wasn't the fight, but the staying. He leaned back against a stone, revolver at his side, and watched over them as dawn crept slow and golden through the storm's remains. The wind came down from the canyon sharp as a blade, cutting through the early dawn like a warning. Dust coiled in slow, restless swirls, whispering against the boards of the abandoned rail yard. Samuel Reed stood alone by the broken fence, hat low, coat flapping like the wings of a dark bird. His hand hovered close to the Colt at his hip, though he prayed to God he wouldn't need it today. The sun had yet to rise, and still the air trembled with the promise of blood. Across the open stretch of dirt stood Marshal Clancy and his men, 5 in all, their badges dulled with grime, their faces drawn hard. Between them, like some ghostly figure caught in the wrong century, stood Clara Hayes. Her wrists were bound, her dress torn at the sleeves, and her face, pale and fierce, bore the defiance of a woman who had already lost too much to fear what came next. Samuel Reed, the marshal called, voice rough with the smoke of his morning cigar. "You've run far enough. You turn her over, and maybe we'll let you ride out with your skin." Samuel's gaze flicked to Clara. Her eyes held steady, though her breath trembled. She whispered, "You don't owe me this, Sam." He didn't answer. His throat was tight, full of words he'd never learned how to say. Instead, he stepped forward, boots crunching over the gravel, his voice steady as a church bell. "She's done nothing you can hang her for. The law died the moment you started selling mercy to the highest bidder." The men laughed low among themselves, their rifles glinting in the half-light. The marshal spat. "You think the world runs on mercy, boy? Out here, law's the only thing that keeps the wolves from eating what's left of us." "Then maybe you've become the wolf," Samuel said. The marshal's eyes narrowed. "Last chance, Reed." For a moment, the world stilled. The wind fell quiet, the birds silent in the trees. Samuel's hand dropped to his holster. The marshal's thumb cocked back the hammer of his revolver. The first shot broke the silence like glass. Then came the thunder. Samuel dove behind a rail cart as splinters flew. Clara screamed, ducking low, chains clattering against the ground. Bullets tore through the air, each one screaming death. Samuel rolled, fired twice, caught one man in the shoulder, another in the thigh. The marshal barked orders, his voice drowned in the chaos. When the smoke cleared for half a breath, Samuel saw Clara sprinting toward the water tower, skirts tearing as she ran. A stray bullet sparked off the metal beside her. He shouted her name, but she didn't turn back. She was running for her life, and maybe, he thought, for his too. He darted from cover, firing as he moved. The marshal's men fell back, dragging their wounded into the brush. Clancy stood tall, unmoved, firing slow and sure. One bullet caught Samuel in the arm. He grunted, stumbled, then steadied himself, his blood slick against his sleeve. The fight raged on until only echoes remained. Dust hung in the air like fog, swallowing the dawn. Samuel leaned against the rail post, chest heaving, revolver nearly empty. Then came the sound of boots crunching. The marshal stepped from the haze, gun raised. "You're a stubborn fool, Reed," he said, eyes cold as winter. "You could have had your peace." Samuel raised his head, a grim smile ghosting his lips. "There's no peace in watching an innocent die." The marshal fired. Samuel dropped, rolling aside, the bullet grazing his ribs. In the same motion, he fired back, once clean and deliberate. The shot hit true. Clancy staggered, hand pressed his chest. He looked at Samuel in disbelief, then down at the blood blooming across his vest. "You'll die for this," he gasped. "Maybe," Samuel said softly, "but not today." The marshal fell, the echo of his collapse swallowed by the wind. Samuel rose slowly, his legs weak, his arm burning with pain. He looked toward the tower. Clara stood at its base, watching him with wide, tear-filled eyes. He holstered his gun and stumbled toward her. When he reached her, she caught him before he fell. For a long moment, neither spoke. The world around them seemed to fade, the broken rail yard, the distant hills, even the dawn breaking behind them. Finally, she said, "You should have let me go." "I couldn't," he murmured. "Not after everything." Her hands shook as she tore at the rope around her wrists. When they came free, she let out a trembling laugh, half relief, half disbelief. "What now?" He looked out toward the horizon. The land stretched endless and raw, gold light spilling across it like forgiveness. "We ride," he said. "Find some place they don't know our names. But they'll come for us. They'll try." They found 2 horses near the edge of town, one gray, one chestnut, both restless and thin. Samuel tied his wound tight, wincing, then helped Clara into the saddle. Her hand brushed his as she steadied herself, and for a heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding born not of words but of survival. They rode east away from the rising sun, where the land bled into the horizon and the sky promised rain. The silence between them was heavy but not empty. Behind them lay the ghosts of what they'd done. Ahead, the uncertain mercy of a world that had never cared much for either of them. Hours passed before Clara spoke again. "He was right about one thing," she said quietly. "The wolves are everywhere." Samuel nodded. "Then we learned to bite back." They rode on until the land turned soft with evening light. A storm brewed far off, its thunder distant but sure. Samuel watched it come with a strange calm, knowing that whatever waited beyond it, lawmen, outlaws, or fate itself, they would face it together. When night fell, they made camp by the river's edge. Clara sat close to the fire, her face lit in gold. "You could have left me," she said again. Samuel stirred the embers, his eyes distant. "Maybe I needed saving too." The wind carried the scent of rain and smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, a lonely sound that stretched into the dark. Clara leaned against his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think we'll ever stop running?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked into the flames, seeing the faces of the men he'd killed, the life he'd lost, the woman beside him. Then, softly, "Maybe the running is what keeps us alive." She smiled faintly. "Then we'll keep riding." As the fire crackled and the storm rolled closer, the two of them sat together, bound not by duty nor by the law, but by the fragile, unyielding thread of shared survival. The dust of their past lay heavy behind them, but in the glow of the firelight, for the first time in a long while, the future didn't seem so far away. And in that quiet stretch of night, Samuel Reed finally understood. Courage wasn't in the fight or the bullet or even the blood spilled. It was in the burden carried, side by side, through the endless dust of the frontier.